Today, we're talking about the art of starting again, lessons on creativity, success, and reinvention. Today's guest was editor of The Face and The Observer magazine, journalist for more than 30 years, writing from anyone from The Times to The Guardian to The Telegraph to Vogue to Elle, GQ, Vanity Fair, and now works as a coach helping creative professionals get over their blocks, manage big projects, and get them out into the world to create a life that they love as well as work that they're proud of. Today, we're going to be talking about this amazing topic of change and reinvention with our amazing guest, Sheryl Garratt. Welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So good to have you here because, as we both know, right now in the world, there is a lot of fear, there is a lot of change. And so today's topic of navigating reinvention and change and creativity, starting again. I've spoken to quite a lot of people too that seem to be coming to the end of a big life cycle and want to reinvent themselves. So there's a lot of this going on and it can bring up a lot of fear. So we're going to be talking about this today with everybody. And if you are tuning in live, you're very welcome to ask us questions as we go along. So tell us a bit about your journey, Sheryl, because I know music was the entry into the creative world for you, wasn't it? Do you want to just take us back briefly to how it all started for you?
I mean, music was different then because that was how you found out about other worlds. It wasn't all a click away. For me, it was a kind of hour on the 90 bus into Birmingham city centre. Started with reading New Musical Express on Thursday, deciding which singles I wanted to listen to. And then I'd go all the way into town on Saturday morning, and the owner of Cyclops Records in Birmingham would always let me listen to 3 singles. So he would play 3, then I would buy one, take it all the way home again, and then play it. And music was a lot more precious then, I guess.
Yeah.
That was my entry into a different way of living, I guess. I started going to see a lot of bands live in Birmingham, meeting people. Two Tone was happening at the time. Dexys and Duran Duran and the Au Pairs and the Beat were all around Birmingham at that time, UB40, and they all became my friends. So I did start to believe that you put 2 singles out, then you went on Top of the Pops, then you got famous, because that's what happened to all my friends. It was quite a surprise to me later on when I found out bands could fail.
Yeah. Wow, what a world to be in. I remember UB40. In fact, UB40 were the very first band I ever went to see in concert.
Yeah, I was just dead lucky to be in the middle of a really tight little scene. And even though Birmingham's a big city, this scene was really small and we all knew each other.
And so was that what you started to write about, the music?
Yeah, I can't sing. I played the oboe, but really badly, and there wasn't much call for oboe playing in that kind of music. So writing is what I could do. So I started making a fanzine about why London is awful and Birmingham is brilliant, obviously. And New Musical Express got in touch with me because there was so much music happening in Birmingham and said, "Do you want to write for us?"
Yeah.
So I literally fell into it by accident, and I don't think I would have had the nerve to fight my way in any other way. But also, I was 16, 17 at the time. I was still at school when my first piece was published in NME, and I didn't know that I didn't know anything. And I think that's the glory of youth, and what makes it harder to invent yourself later is I just didn't know that I was stupid and didn't know how anything worked. So I just wandered my way around making mistakes and learning from them. And I think when you get older, that gets harder to do.
Yeah, so you were kind of in this world, just living it, just going with the flow and going with emotions. I just have to pause for a minute because Chris is tuning in saying that I saw UB40 in Los Angeles. Wow.
They're great, aren't they, Chris?
Yeah, amazing. And so, yeah, I know now that I know nothing. Yeah, that's what Chris said.
That hit me in my late 20s, Chris, and it stayed there ever since.
So you're in this incredibly creative world, you start writing, and then what happens once you kind of establish yourself then as writing for musicians and bands? And what
I went to university in London, which was my way of leaving Birmingham. Carried on writing for NME, again, fell into another job working for City Limits, which was the London Listings magazine at the time. And from that, I just learned about all the music, all the clubs that were on, started going out clubbing, ended up at the Face. And it just felt like one thing led to another until my son was born. And then suddenly I had to think, what am I doing? And money might actually be quite important, because I never really bothered about money. It wasn't important to me. But suddenly I got a child to look after. We needed a house in London instead of living in a squat or a little flat. And I had to kind of work out what I was going to do to make a career of this.
Yeah. Okay. So where did that lead you to?
Sunday Times.
Was
They
it?
were incredibly kind to me, and not many people will take on a writer who's heavily pregnant and then got a small child. They did.
Wow.
And they gave me loads of things that I could write really quickly at home.
Yeah.
And I had to learn to write really quickly because I never had. I'd always been quite a slow writer. But suddenly, that thing about having a child, you don't have that luxury of 8 hours about things. If he had a nap, I had to write. If we had 3 hours childcare, I wrote an article. So it got me out of my own way quite a lot. I think I've been quite precious about process before then.
Yeah. And what were you writing about at that point? Was it still music, or was the subject changing for you then?
No, because I'd been at the Face by then. I could pretty much write about anything to do with popular culture. So, 1 week it would be George Michael's had a new haircut. Can you write about it? The next week it would be John Galliano's new collection is influenced by this. Could you write about that? So I would just kind of write 800 to 1,000 words by Wednesday on whatever subject they'd given me on Tuesday. And I got really good at kind of going with my first thought. And you'll have to excuse me because I've got a cold and I need to.
Of course.
Excuse me.
That's okay. There's lots of people tuning in feeling probably quite unwell at the moment, given the time of the year that we're in.
And so those carefree days. Yeah, exactly. We all have to grow up, don't we? And technology has changed such a lot. And I think that's the thing about change and adaptation now. We're all having to do it constantly because, we can't imagine a world without the internet now. And that was only 20 years ago. You can't imagine a world where someone isn't walking along the road with a mobile phone in their hand now. And yet that isn't that long ago. And the change is getting faster and faster with the advent of AI, especially, I think.
Yeah. And so you went on this incredible journey then of writing, and then it evolved. And then kind of what began to happen then? Because right now you have a book out called Creative Play, and it's 365 ideas for artists to have dates and solo adventures, which I just love. We'll share the link below. There it is, Creative Play. So I'm curious to know the gap between your writing for the Sunday Times to this book being out in the world, and you being such an advocate now to help artists navigate, their lives and this topic. What happened in between that?
Journalism changed a lot, I think, is one of the things that happened. And the other thing that happened was I started to really miss what I had as a magazine editor, which is collaborating with creative people to get the best out of them. So when you're doing interviews, it is collaborative, but only to a degree. And more after the internet started taking little chunks out of your piece and repeating it out of context, you had to be very careful what you asked in interviews, and the people you were interviewing had to be more and more careful about how they answered, not because they didn't trust you, but because what it looks like when bits of it are taken out of context. So I was missing those kind of, what I've always loved interviewing people about was, you made this film, how did you do that? You made this painting, how did you think of that idea? So it's always process for me. How did you do it? Where did the idea come from? Where's your next idea coming from? But more and more journalism became about, who are you dating? Would you have plastic surgery? Just questions I wasn't interested in asking someone. And I was really missing that collaboration where you sit with a stylist or a photographer or an artist or an illustrator or a writer and go, right, how we're going to make something brilliant.
Yeah.
And so I started I think at one point I was made redundant from the Observer, and I was a bit lost. And I think I needed a life coach at that point.
Mhm.
But because my training is always go and do it, I trained to be one instead. So I trained in this thing, then realized it was all about talking to corporate people and they didn't speak my language. So I went back to journalism for another kind of 8-9 years. But slowly friends of mine started saying, I've decided to break up the band. Would you talk to me about my next moves? I'm stuck in this with my art. How could I move on to the next phase? And I started using coaching skills with them, realized I really loved it, realized I could have those really deep conversations where you were like, tell me everything, without hurting people by kind of them publishing it and it getting misunderstood.
Yeah.
So I started leaning more and more into coaching, and that sounds really linear and logical now. It wasn't. There were 5 years of dark nights of the soul and me kind of going like, perhaps I should be doing this for a living and perhaps I should be doing that.
Yeah.
I think we always think these things should be straight lines. And in my experience, they're much more like being on a roller coaster or just lots of dots that you join up later and they make a pattern.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of blundering about until I came to coaching. But then, I kind of really leaned into it and decided to go for it because I was just really, really enjoying the conversations I was having.
And so when you started to then lean towards, it was the creative coaching for creatives, how did that start to feel? Because I would imagine at the point of you evolving, like you say, through this dark time and foggy time where it didn't seem to make sense, and then there'll be, I'd imagine, like a fragment of an idea of, oh, the coaching could be for creatives. And so talk to me about that part, because did it come easy to you, or was there a lot of self-doubt and worry?
So much self-doubt and worry. And what I always tell to clients about this is follow the breadcrumbs, follow those little sparks of joy. When you read the self-help books, they all say follow your passion. And that just seems to me to be terrible advice, because if we knew what our passion was at that point, we'd be doing it. I don't think anyone needs to be told to do something they're passionate about. You just do it. But I think it's kind of often, we've got family, earning money, worries about this, that, and the other. It's hard to find what our passions are. It all gets squashed down. So I would just say, follow the breadcrumbs, follow the joy. If something excites you, do a bit more, see how it feels, and see the whole thing as a series of experiments you're running. There's no failure. There's no wrong turns. It's all data. It's all telling you, I want more of this. I want less of that. So it's like giving yourself time to explore.
Yeah.
It's really, really important, and not beating yourself up for not knowing. Why should you know?
Let's talk about that, because one of your passions is talking about this kind of playtime, isn't it? And making space for that. And I think anyone who's sitting in a season of change will benefit greatly from this conversation of allowing yourself to play. Should we just, before we talk about play, should we talk about the different scenarios people might find themselves in right now as they're facing change? Because for some people, I was saying before I came on, I have a friend who is completely reinventing, was an established artist, a ceramicist, and just said to me last week, I literally just want to scrap everything and start again. And there's some people that just go from just, get rid, let's start again, let's just like clean the slate. And for some people, it's a feeling of, I don't really feel my art anymore. It just feels stagnant. But people, and this is why I would imagine you kept going back to journalism. It's because it's what you know, isn't it? And a lot of people do that. They just go back to what they know, even though that it's not quite right. But I don't know what else to do. So we'll just keep going and we'll keep doing this until something forces us then to make a change. That's what usually happens, isn't it?
Yeah, and we all need to earn a living as well. So, if we've got something that's working for us, I think it's just about allowing yourself to explore, allowing yourself to play and make mistakes. But I think one of the really important things to say about reinvention later in life, I get so many people say to me, so I've got to start again. No, you haven't. the slate doesn't get wiped clean. Everything you learn in the first 40 years of your life will be relevant to the next 40 in your life. There's
Yeah.
so much you know how to do. You know, you might not be doing ceramics, but you do know how to talk about art and about the things you make.
Yeah.
You know, there's so much we learn along the road that becomes relevant again, and that skills we can reuse.
Yeah.
So you're not starting again.
No.
Who are you? You've got all the experience, and you've got experience of making stuff. If you've already found something that works for you creatively, then you can make it work in another field as well. You know all the doubts and fears of creative process, and you know you'll feel that in your new medium as well. So it's not completely starting again. But yes, I think there are those two styles, Michelle, that you were talking about. You know, some people are just like, burn all the bridges, burn the lot down,
Yes.
start again from the ashes. I have never had that kind of courage. You know, I'm much more incremental, you know, sticking my toe in, then maybe my foot, then maybe, you know, up to the knee, and testing the waters. But also, if you're not sure, it's good to keep testing and checking in with yourself. How's this feel? Am I even enjoying it? Is it right for me? And I think it's really important to have that time where you're just checking how it feels, checking back in with yourself.
Yeah. So talk to us about this making time to play, and especially in relation to your book as well. I'm intrigued to learn more.
I think it's such an important part of creative process, and it's such an important part of finding our way. And there's this terrible assumption that we need to abandon play, you know, as soon as we get to adulthood, and that earning money is far more important than play. But I have never met a creative, a successful creative, and I've interviewed thousands of them, who isn't playful in some way, who doesn't make space for daydreaming and walking and looking at interesting stuff and having interesting conversations, and just messing about. You know, the number of people who will say to me, well, I was in the studio and messing about with some pieces of paper, and suddenly I came up with the idea of, or I was on a bike ride across Hackney Marshes, and then this idea came to me. And it's very rarely sitting at your desk, sitting in your studio, straining for something new. It's usually when we're off doing other things. So, you know, once we know what the problems are and we've worked on them enough to define them, sometimes going and doing something completely different is the best way for our brain to find the solutions. And I do think that sense of playfulness, that sense of like, why don't I just go this way to see what happens? Or why don't I just shove these three things that don't belong together to see what happens? We need that as artists and creatives. And we also need it as grown-ups. You know, just all of us need a bit of space to play. You know, this idea that we are nothing but our work and our work defines us. God, that leads for a dull and grey life. And it's why I think so many people talk about burnout, because they're not making space to see what's next, to play, or just to have a laugh. You know, there's just to do something because it's a lot of fun. It's a perfectly good reason to do something. We don't have to justify it.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that resist it, I've met in my time, because they are scared, like you say, of wasting time, wasting resources. Not a big one, like you touched on, is the money aspect. So the feeling, and especially in today's world, if I'm not contributing towards the household, or if I'm not continuously working on things that I can see bring an ROI, like there has to be a return. And if I'm not bringing in a return, it makes me anxious. Can we speak to this, Sheryl? Because I think this is something that really holds people back and allowing themselves to play.
And I think it's about balance. It's about making time in a busy week to play and explore, you know, have an afternoon off to go and see some exhibitions and meet some mates. That doesn't mean you can't be earning money the rest of the time. But I think sometimes we do just hit a dead end where we're just pushing and pushing and pushing and doing nothing very interesting. Our income starts going down because we're repeating ourselves. And to me, that is a time to take a month off and do some radical play, and just see what's
radical play. I love that. Radical play. I love it.
I do think as well, you know, we
Exciting.
chose this path. Nobody
Mm.
chose art because they thought they were going to make their fortune. You know, there are plenty of, we'd have gone into the city, we'd have studied law if we wanted to make, if money was our main motivator.
Mm.
But I do think what we want, a lot of us, is freedom and flexibility in our
Yeah.
time. And we've built these lives where we have this. And then what do? We start working 10-hour days, and treating ourselves like we were clocking in and clocking out to be valid. And I think there is a lot of that feeling with art that, you know, we've got to prove it's a proper job by putting in the hours.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's really counterproductive. Of course, we've all done a 12-hour day to finish something to a deadline. Of course we have, and that's necessary. And sometimes you surprise yourself when you go into the tunnel like that and really work. But you need to balance that with time off as well. It can't all be relentless work. Otherwise, we're getting no good inputs. You know, someone used in the chat that metaphor of the compost heap. You have to keep putting stuff in so it can all mix and mingle and turn into something rich to grow new ideas from. And you have to be doing that regularly, even when you're busy.
I'm going to read that comment that was sent in from Anne. Yes, your life is your compost of learning and creativity. It's all in there. Golden nuggets, rich pickings, just a big cupboard of playfulness.
Oh, I love that, Anne. Great ways of expressing it.
And the other thing to remember too, I've found, because I'm guilty of resisting the creative play, and I've been doing a lot more of it recently. And every time I go back to it, I realize how much it just informs my life too. It's not just an outlet or something to do just so I can switch off. It actually gives me so much information, you know, about it's just so deep sometimes, and sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's very light, but it gives me correlations between works that I've made in the past. And actually, before we came on, Sheryl, I looked back at a piece that I just created on a whim, and I went for a walk and I took a photograph of a bridge that I was interested in, and then I came home and I thought, right, I'll just draw that picture, and I drew it. This was probably 20 years ago, and I still have that drawing today, and that drawing tells me so much more about myself today than it did when I drew it. And it tells me so much about the art, the relationship I have with art, the patterns that I was drawn to back then, which are still relevant today, 20 years on. It reminds me of that trip over the bridge. I can still see it as if I'm there today. And so if we resist that playfulness, we are resisting these magical moments that fall 20 years later, 10 years later, or when they're ready to come back. And that's the fabric of the, you know, being a creative. It's like, yeah, it all weaves in and comes back, I believe, when you need it most. So a little doodle in your sketchbook, which might feel insignificant at the time, is going to come back with a bang at some point. Or it can do. It might not.
I hesitate in talking about it in terms of productivity, because I think, you know, life isn't about just producing as much as possible.
Yeah.
But everyone I coach who says to me, I'm really stuck, I'm not making enough work, I go, play more. And they always resist. And eventually they start doing it because I go on and on at them. Yeah. And, you know, 6 to 8 weeks of going on regular play dates, they're suddenly like, I've got this weird idea. I bumped into someone I've wanted to collaborate with for ages, and we went for a coffee, and now we are. Weird coincidences tend to happen, or you're just opening up to the world more. And when the world comes in, stuff happens, you know.
Yeah.
I had a novelist once who was really, really stuck on this one character. And she started really huffily going on play dates to shut me up and prove me wrong, she said. And about 4 weeks in, she said, I was in a coffee shop sulking that you'd made me do it. And this woman said, isn't it a shame no one wears hats anymore? And I realized, first of all, that my character had a hat. And secondly, that was the first thing you were going to hear her say. And she suddenly, this whole thing clucked into place from this elderly woman being very nostalgic for the 1930s in a coffee shop. And I think that sort of thing, you can't have that happen if you're just sitting in front of a computer or sitting in your studio. But if you're out and about, the world tends to deliver, the universe tends to deliver what you need. And as you say, it's those little throwaway things that later on you keep thinking about it and it turns into something much bigger and juicier. But you've got to make the space for that to come in.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. Anne says here, the guilt of the money thing, the stress of it as a creativity killer. Yes, we can't have a pound attached to each stroke of our paintbrushes. And I think what Cheryl's saying is so poignant right now, that there can be so much fear in the world that makes us detach from this feeling of wanting to play, because it just feels so wrong when you've got so many stresses or things going on in life. But actually it's the complete opposite. And I totally relate to that, what you're saying, Cheryl, about when you start to play and you start to see things in a different way, and then you'll meet a person because of that play, or you'll get chatting and then they introduce you to someone else, and it is actually what you need. And if it is money that you are, wanting from your creativity, this is all part of it. And some people just get so fixated on the money that they miss these beautiful parts, and where the opportunities are, and where the introductions are, and the space, like you've described, that space which then gives you the clarity and gives you the answers because they're staring you in the face.
Exactly. And money is really important, not minimizing it at all. But I'm saying that you're not going to fall into poverty and end up living under a railway bridge because you take a couple of hours off each week and go and do something you really want to do. And I think when you're self-employed, we tend to go from 0 to 60 like that. We go from like, I haven't earned any money this week, to we will be homeless by next month. And I can still do it really, really quickly. I say no to a paid job. And, in my head, that's like, well, no one's ever going to ask you to do anything again for money, ever. You said no once. It's almost like we sort of feel like we can't. But I think just saying no and making space is a radical act. I think making room for joy in a world that's full of fear, and when there's a lot of division and stoking of hatred going on, to spend time to connect with others, to remember what fun it is to be out in the world, and to show other people that is possible, is something we can do as artists. We've built that freedom where we do have a bit more control over our time and our lives. So we should be modeling it for other people. And, if got kids, for our kids, work doesn't have to always be a grind. It can be a joy. That's not to say making art is easy by any means. It's really hard sometimes. We all know that. But equally, showing people it can also be joyful, I think, is really, really important.
So have you got any advice for people who are listening in, who are facing this dilemma of they're an established artist and they feel that things aren't right, but they just don't know what to do? They either haven't got the, I want to say, confidence to admit it, or they're too scared to admit it. This was me a couple of years ago. I could hear the words in my head. It's time to say something new. It's time to say something new. And part of me didn't know what that meant, but another big part was resisting the change. I was kind of pushing it away because that was too scary for me. It's like, no, let's just keep going with what we know. And it's now moving in a bigger way because I was ignoring it for so long. And now it's like, right, now it's really time to change. So have you got any advice, Cheryl, for people listening in today that are in that situation?
Yeah, I would say play, and look where you're being rigid about play. There are people who are really good in their personal life at taking time out and playing, but incredibly rigid in their working practices. And maybe for you, it's like, make some bad art. Do something, do something you won't be good at, use a different medium, just act as if you're 4 again and see what happens. For people who are kind of quite loose in their practice and quite willing to kind of experiment at work, you'll often find they're kind of almost puritanical about any kind of joy in their personal life. And for you, I would say, go to the pictures in the afternoon on your own. act like you're playing truant sometimes.
Yeah.
A few things that feel really naughty and fun, and see how that feeds back in. And the thing I get a lot, when I say this to clients, is they'll say, I don't know how to play. I can't remember. I have no idea what would be joyful. And that's the book that I wrote started from me making a list of other people's play dates and play dates I'd been on.
Yeah.
I had 100 and I would send that to clients. And then somebody said to me, like, it'd be great if you could think of even more. And so I thought 365 and did it. But I think it's a really sad indictment of our world that, a 50-year-old adult who's very successful in their work can say to me, I don't know how to play. I don't know how to enjoy myself anymore. I don't know how to be silly in the studio anymore. And I think that's the bit we have to reclaim, and don't feel guilty about it. Don't feel judged by it. So many of us are in the same position that we feel we can't take time to play. But it should start small. Start with kind of little 10-minute play dates. Start with an hour of silliness in the morning before you get onto your real practice, and just see what happens. Be curious rather than judgmental. I think that's the really important thing. When you start reclaiming play after a long time of doing it, you will do things that you don't enjoy anymore. I had this fantasy of pottery for some reason. I think it was Demi Moore and the Potter's Wheel. So I booked a class, had a go, didn't like it, didn't like the smell, didn't like the feeling on my hands. But I knew that, it wasn't a failure. It was like, that was an interesting experiment. Now try something else. And I think to have that mindset of you're just finding out what brings you joy at this stage in your life. Sometimes that's going to be related to things you enjoyed as a child. Sometimes it's going to be completely different. I've got a client at the moment and she has the same date every week. She has a bath. She plays music really loud. She gets out and reads a trashy novel for 30 minutes because she's very, very short of time and this feels indulgent to her. But she's already starting to develop an idea. She's an illustrator about things that look like 1950s trashy novels.
Yeah, this is it. When it's like you say, follow the joy, or just even just something that feels right. It doesn't even have to be massive joy, does it, Cheryl? It can be just follow something that feels nice, or something that you feel that, oh, okay, I can just switch off for a moment. And I love that reading that novel and making that time for the novel then has been the catalyst then, or the next step, let's say, for the next idea. And something that you have just reminded me of as you were talking there was advice I was given, and I don't know where this advice was given to me from, but if you walk a particular way to the shop, go a different route, and this is what we're talking about here, just go a different way. And even that, something so simple as that can spark a parallel in your own life, or even just walking a different way. You just see the whole world from a different perspective. You think, there's this tree here. I didn't even know that this tree was here, and it starts to move things inside of you.
And it's all about making tiny little spaces in your day. If you're going to have a cup of coffee, don't do 5 other things while you're drinking the coffee. Take 5 minutes, drink the coffee, savor the coffee. If you're eating lunch and it's your practice to kind of shovel it into your mouth while working or reading or watching TV or doing something else, take 15 minutes and actually taste your lunch. It's those little breaks that kind of bring you back into the present and give you ideas to play with. I like to, if I possibly can, take my lunch outside and just sit on a bench somewhere and either watch people, or I'm really lucky to have a green space here that's covered in squirrels at the moment. And they're just hilarious. Why wouldn't I want to go and spend 15 minutes and eat a sandwich and watch squirrels chasing each other? But it's just making those tiny little spaces to breathe when when you're moving from one task to the next. And when you step back as well, a lot of busy work disappears. If I go out for 15 minutes, walk to the park, eat my sandwich, walk back again, by the time I get back, I'll look at what I was doing and thinking, why am I answering all those emails that aren't important? What are
Mm.
we supposed to be doing today is this. And I can
Mm.
just pull myself back to what's important. Because a
Mm.
lot of what we do is about being addicted to adrenaline and busy work,
Yeah.
and taking
Yeah.
things off and doing as many things as we can.
That's me.
And the second you make a bit of space in your day, you think, no, what I'm actually avoiding is this really hard thing in my art. Yeah, I
Mm.
don't need to be doing this right now.
Yeah.
And you get back to what's important, or you realize what's important might be to finish at 5 o'clock tonight and actually spend some time with your partner, or get to your friend's birthday party without making excuses for being late. You know, those kind of things. Because I think we have this terrible idea at the moment that life is what gets in the way of work, rather than that work is part of our life. You know, this isn't about interruptions, it's about enjoying our life, enjoying our time. If the kids run in and interrupt us, let's take 10 minutes and really listen to them, and then say, right, I'll be finished in an hour. Go back now, you know, but rather than treating everything as an obstacle to the work we're supposed to be doing, like all we're here for to do is produce and sell. It's about enjoying a really rich life and play and joy, and being a bit more spontaneous with our time, and creating those spaces is part of being fully alive, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Jackie sent in a comment, and I would imagine lots of people can relate to this. So I'm paraphrasing Jackie's question a little bit, but what about people who come in to art after an enormous break and are very, very in that mindset of procrastination and lots of fear, and also held back by disability or other factors? You know, there's lots of people who feel that there's just so many challenges in front of them and they just can't get past the obstacles. And I know you've already probably answered it in an essence in what you've been saying today.
Kindness really helped. Kindness and compassion here, and start really small. Start almost laughably small. If you're procrastinating constantly, set a timer and do 10 minutes. And then tell yourself, if I do the 10 minutes, that's enough. I'll just come back and do 10 minutes more tomorrow. And then you can slowly build that. But if you have a disability or time shortage or anything like that, you have to work with what you've got. You know, you're going to be slower than other people. That's fine. You'll still get there eventually if you just do little and often and are kind to yourself. You know, rest a lot, but also give yourself permission to be rubbish. I think that's the thing. As we get older, our standards get higher and higher. The gap between that brilliant thing we have in our head and the thing we actually make almost gets bigger as we get more experience, because we expect more. And I think sometimes let's do it like we were 5. I came across a lovely quote in a book the other day where a university professor, his 7-year-old daughter asked him what he does. And he said, oh, you know, I teach art. I teach people to draw. And his daughter said, you mean they forget? And I think that's the thing about us. You know, we know how to do this if we just let ourselves do it without switch the inner critic on for a bit. What would happen if I'm allowed to be totally rubbish at this? You know, I say it often to writers because it's something I've learned myself as a writer. The only way you get to good writing is through bad writing. You know, you have to write a really terrible first draft, then the second one's better. And I think we forget this, especially if we've had a gap and we're trying to pick it up again. We're like, oh, this needs to be perfect. And you've got the added pressure of it needs to be even more perfect because I've wasted so much time, or I've lost so much time, and other people are ahead of me. And it's like, you are where you are. That's the only place any of us can be. And it's like, accept that, be kind, start making things that are small and scrappy and stupid, if you like, or playful, and they will build. You've done it before, you can do it again.
So for our listeners, Sheryl, if you were going to give them one task, would it be this? Would it be to have a play date with yourself and maybe just start with whatever feels right once a month, if that feels good? And what could the action be for people listening in today to take away a
I would
small
say
step?
that. Just put, you know, if you're really time poor, put an hour aside. If you have the time, make it a whole afternoon and go and do something playful. You know, whether it's going to an exhibition, whether it's playing hooky and going to the cinema in the afternoon, whether it's just reading a book or meeting up with an interesting friend, but go and do something that feels like fun. And if it feels like a waste of time or really indulgent, you're probably on the right track. Or childish or silly or something you'd be embarrassed telling people about. Just do it and see what happens. And don't expect a result from the first time. Keep doing it with an open mind and with a lot of curiosity, and just see what happens. But honestly, do 10 or so and magic will start to happen, because it always does.
I love it. Go and put the play date in the diary, my friends. And also, please come back to this episode and let us know when you had your play date. We're holding you accountable here. Put your play date in the diary. Come back. Let us know that you put it in the diary. Let us know when you did it and let us know what you did.
Oh, yeah,
We
definitely.
will all share. We will all share. So before we wrap up, I'm going to just read a few comments from people who are tuning in live. Jackie, who we just answered the question for, sends in massive thank you and said this actually made me feel quite tearful. I think that speaks volumes, doesn't it, Sheryl, when we feel hit in the heart by something? It's because we know we want to change, and we know there's something we want, and we're maybe whatever, there's a challenge in the way, or and so it means something to you, and that's why that hit you in the heart. So thank you, Sheryl, for taking the time to move Jackie, and I hope this helps you moving forward, Jackie, too. And Chris says, I think my first task is to buy the book. Yeah. So remind us.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, please, Sheryl, please remind us of the book, because I think this could be a great asset for people who want to kind of step forward into this creative play.
The book's called Creative Play, 365 Ideas for Artists, States and Solo Adventures. And it really is just a list of ideas for you to play with. It's available on Amazon or through my website, thecreativelife.net. And if you get it, please let me know what you think. It'd be lovely to know. And
Wonderful.
I want to know about the date.
Yes, we do. And where can people find you, Sheryl? Are you on social media? Where would you like people to find you?
I'm not big on social media, I'm going to be honest, but you can find me at thecreativelife.net.
Yes,
I do a weekly newsletter that's a lot
yeah,
like everything we've just been talking about. So do sign up for that. I'd love to have you on the list. And otherwise, if I can help in any way, you can email me via my site. Let me know if there's anything I can do.
Incredible. Thank you to everyone who's tuned in. For those who will be watching the replay as well, we can't wait to hear how you find this episode and let us know about that play date. Thank you to Sheryl for being so gracious with your time and sharing all this amazing knowledge with us. We really appreciate you. It's always nice to hang out with fellow creatives and talk art. This has been delightful on a Monday afternoon. Thank you, my friends. We'll pop all the links below. Thank you, Sheryl. Is there anything you want to say as we just wrap up? As a parting word.
So carry on being creative and carry on being true to yourselves and making your work, because it means everything. You don't know how you living your best life, you being authentic, will affect other people. It's like ripples in a pond. It spreads out.
Amazing. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Sheryl. We'll see you soon. Take care. Bye.
Bye.